in the beginning. I wonder how you'd finish that sentence. Everyone has to start from somewhere, and the place that you choose to start will often end up determining where you conclude. So the idea is what we call a worldview. Now, everybody has a worldview, whether you like to think so or not. A worldview is basically a lens through which you view life. It's the underlying truth claims that you've built your life on, which will impact and affect how you choose to live day by day. It'll change the decisions that you make, the opinions that you form, and the kind of conclusions that you draw. So worldviews are a powerful and important thing. Now, a worldview asks 4 basic questions about the reality that we live in. Firstly, the question of origin. Where did I come from? What does it mean to be human? Secondly, meaning. Is there a purpose to life, or is it all just random? Morality. How should I live? Is there a right and a wrong? And destiny. Where ultimately am I headed? What happens when I die? Now, this might seem a little bit formulaic, but if you think about it, these questions matter hugely. And you probably have an answer to each of them, even if that answer is a little bit vague. And so whether we realize it or not, we use our answers to these questions to decide how we're going to live and what we're going to value. Now, one of the criticisms that I often hear people make about Christianity, or people from other faiths, is that they've just been brainwashed. They've absorbed the beliefs and the worldviews of their parents or their previous generations. Now, there's perhaps an element of truth in that because it's the easiest thing to stick with what you've grown up with. But surely that requires people not to think for themselves. And if we're going to be fair, that same claim has to be leveled against anybody who believes the same thing as their parents. The issue is not about whether or not your parents believe it, but whether or not it's true. Now, let me take football as an example, the British religion. Imagine this made-up scenario for a moment. Imagine I'm a massive Newcastle United fan. Why? Because I grew up in the Northeast, and most people who lived near me would support Newcastle. But more importantly, my dad supported them. He brought me their kit, he taught me their chants, he even got us a family season ticket so we never missed a game. He took me to my first game when I was 4 years old, and I've been going ever since. But one time when I was 8, I made friends with a Mackem. Now, Mackems are from Sunderland, and they would support Sunderland AFC. So you've got Newcastle and Sunderland AFC. And this friend wanted me to come to a match with him. But my dad mocked me mercilessly, and I realised there was no point. Sunderland are rubbish anyway, and I hate them. So why waste my time? They're all stupid. That friendship didn't last, especially when Sunderland won the Premiership and Newcastle got relegated. But whatever, Sunderland are still rubbish. Do you see what I mean? Newcastle and Sunderland, perhaps a really trivial example, but a lot of our passions or ideas are passed down. That doesn't mean that everything about them is right, but they do impact and shape how we view things, and we need to be aware of them, especially within the concept of worldviews. There may be many reasons why we've developed the worldview that we have. Perhaps it's our parents, our friends, our work colleagues, the culture that we live in, the media or the movies that we watch, the literature that we read, the things that we've experienced, or the way that we feel about things. So many competing influences. The chances are all of us have a slightly skewed worldview. And so we have to work out whether or not what we believe is rational. So everybody has a worldview, but I would argue that not all worldviews are equally valid. They might look good, but do they really work? The question is, what is your worldview? And does it stack up? Now, you might have seen this picture. I'm an ice cream connoisseur. I love the stuff. But controversially, I'm also one of those odd people who really enjoys Neapolitan ice cream. I think the strawberry vanilla chocolate combo is awesome. But the thing with Neapolitan ice cream is that it's not Neapolitan ice cream if you only eat one or two of the flavors. The only way that you've eaten Neapolitan ice cream is by eating all three together. You wouldn't buy a tub of this just to eat the vanilla. Likewise, when it comes to a worldview, there are also three distinct tests that a good worldview has to pass. If it only passes one or even two of these tests, it's not really a good or viable worldview. It's flawed and you shouldn't buy it. So these are the important flavors, if you like, to a strong worldview. And they've all got fancy, pretentious sounding names just to make me sound like I'm more educated than I am. But firstly, we have it being of logical consistency. That means it has to be consistent within itself. If it's just full of like contradictions and holes that can't be explained, then it's flawed. So, for example, to say that all religions are the same is logically inconsistent, as they don't all hold the same beliefs. For example, there cannot only be one God in Islam, and yet multiple gods of Hinduism. One could be right, but not both. Secondly, they need to be of empirical adequacy. That means, does it correspond to reality? Is there any evidence that relates to the world around us, to the things that we can test and see? Does it make sense of the things that we know and experience? Does it fit the facts of the world that we live in? For example, like in Australia, a religion that follows a flying spaghetti monster wouldn't necessarily seem to fit that category. Then thirdly, we have experiential relevance, by which we mean, is it livable? If you followed your worldview through, is it possible to live it out and thrive that way? Will it help you to live in such a way that makes sense of the relationships and the choices around you? Is it practical? And does it work in the world as we know it? So, for example, being a Jedi might sound like a really fun box to tick in your census, but you'll probably stumble when it actually comes to trying to harness the power of the Force. You see, these three flavors, these tests, are really important for us to ask ourselves when we come to question why we believe what we believe. If you're anything like me, perhaps you hadn't realized that there were these three logical tools to assess what you think. But because your worldview plays such a major part in your thinking, it's well worth taking time to work this through. You may even be surprised that what you thought you believed isn't as consistent and strong as you'd imagined. Now, any normal person at this point would probably be thinking, this is not what I thought tonight was going to be looking like. I thought he was going to give me reasons to believe in a God or why it even matters, but instead he's got a bit philosophical. And you're right to think that. But I wanted to say from the start, unless you can acknowledge that you already come into this topic with prejudices or preconceived notions of faith, then you'll not get a whole lot out of what we're going to be saying this evening. I would love tonight to be an opportunity for us to have open and honest discussion. We can all learn from each other, whatever belief system we might currently hold. So let's be open-minded and follow the clues where they lead us, even if that takes us to an unexpected place. However, we also have to acknowledge that there are two dangers as we come to ask these big questions about God, the universe, and our place within it all. The first is to develop an unhealthy fixation on unattainable certainty. By this I mean there's virtually nothing that humans understand completely. We can know a lot about some things, but we can't know everything about everything. For example, I love movies, and I consider myself to be a bit of a movie buff. But the truth is, it wouldn't take you very long before you exposed my lack of knowledge in certain genres, and probably in most movie areas. Most scientists would probably agree that they know a fairly comprehensive amount on their chosen specialist field, but perhaps not so much outside of that. So we have to hold our hands open and be honest. We don't know everything. And if we want 100% proof of anything, we're going to come up short. But do you think that the meaning and the purpose of life can only be discovered by those with PhDs in quantum physics? I don't feel like the world was designed that way. The second danger is the polar opposite, to swing the other way and develop an equally unhealthy skepticism that says, if I can't know everything, then I can't know anything. This is quite a defeatist approach. There's plenty that we can know. And when we stack up all of the evidence, we can reach a conclusion that strongly points us in one direction. For example, a mother could tell her child that she loves him, and her words and actions, her spending habits, and all the time that she gives to him may suggest that what she's saying is true. But at the end of the day, the child can never prove it 100%. He could keep pursuing that certainty relentlessly, always wanting to know for sure, and in the process, find no joy in their relationship. Or he could leave home for fear that he may be wrong. If he can't be absolutely, completely, 100% sure she loves him, what's the point in being in the same house? But to my mind, the sensible, rational response would be that he knows enough, understands the clear signs and evidences for her love, and acts accordingly, choosing to believe his mother's love and reciprocate, to be her child. So if God exists, and he's the God who created the universe, then it follows that we wouldn't be able to prove his existence in the same way that we could with any earthly object. Rather, we have to find, as Tim Keller says, the clues that he's written into the universe, including into us. That's why if God exists, we would expect to find that he appeals to our rational faculties. If we were made in his image as rational, personal beings, there should be some resonance between his mind and ours. With that in mind, how can we really be sure whether there's anyone out there? Well, in a moment, we're going to split into a couple of breakout rooms to talk about your worldview. So, well, I hope that was okay. And probably for many of you, you felt like you had more that you could talk about. Maybe for some of you, it was painfully long as it was. But let's continue as we look through this topic a little bit more together now. So let's take a look, shall we, at and really start to consider for ourselves whether there is a God in the universe, whether we can look for any clues or evidences for the God of Christianity, or if it's more likely that there's really nobody there at all. Let's look at just a couple of the signposts towards the God of Christianity and see if Christianity itself stands up as a coherent worldview. Now, for the sake of clarity, I'm going to compare Christianity with a purely atheistic worldview. And I'd like you to see how both worldviews require a faith of sorts. And as we look at this, a guy called Andrew Wilson helpfully reminds us of the importance of honestly challenging your own views. He says this: you have two options. One, I'll go back. One, you can decide and investigate what you believe to find out whether or not there's any evidence for it. Or two, you can decide not to investigate because your beliefs are really just a question of faith. They're your opinion and none of anybody else's business, and that's that. If you choose option one, you run the risk of finding out that you've been wrong for years, which most people don't really like very much. But if you choose option two, you're doomed to be completely irrelevant because what you believe has no evidence that other people can understand or critique. So let's think this through for ourselves. A lot could be said tonight, but I'm not going to have time to go into a lot of detail. This is very much a brief overview. And if there's time at the end of the evening, do feel free to enter any chat questions that you have to me, and I'll try and address them in a Q&A if we've got time. But firstly, I want to look at origin. Now, broadly speaking, we can think of origin in two categories: cause and intent. Firstly, cause. I think we can probably all agree that the world is pretty old. Christians use a theory called the cosmological argument. Science claims that everything which begins to exist has a cause. If my brother has a broken arm, maybe it's because I pushed him down the stairs. It didn't just happen. Since the universe began to exist, the cosmological argument goes, then the universe must have had a cause, and that was God. Now, this idea is often challenged by atheists who pose the question, well, who created God? But that assumes that this infinite creator God of the universe had a beginning, which misunderstands the eternal nature of the God of Christianity. And it's also interesting to realize that until a few decades ago, scientists argued that the universe had always existed, that it was infinite itself. And then the Big Bang theory came along. And for a while, a number of scientists resisted the theory because it actually sounded a little bit too much like what was written in the Bible. Christians might say that God caused the Big Bang. Atheists might say either they don't know what caused it, or perhaps like Stephen Hawking claimed, gravity itself caused it from nothing. Which is fine, but where did that gravity come from? And what was there before it all began? Secondly, we have intent. Christians claim that the universe is too intricate and intentional, that everything has like a signature of an intelligent designer who carefully made it this way, in the same way that a painting has a painter or a watch has a watchmaker. The design is just too perfect to have happened by accident. But atheists would say, well, we were never there to see it happen, that there's no grand design, no plan, but rather a series of gradual yet purposeless evolutionary steps over millions of years has led to this world that we now know and experience. But either way, the world is undeniably complex. Christians say it's finely tuned. There are some impossibly large numbers out there to help us explain this, and I'm mostly going to try and avoid them. But here's just one from a professor at Princeton who came up with the odds against our universe. Just go back. Randomly taking a form that was suitable for life, and he calculated it at a likelihood of 1 in 10 billion to the power of 124. To be fair, I have absolutely no idea how he did this, how he calculated such a thing. It seems to me extraordinarily unlikely that this just happened by chance. And that's just for the universe to have had a form where life is even possible. Recently, atheists have come back at this claim with this multiverse theory, which suggests the possibility of an enormous number of other galaxies that exist alongside our own. There you go, there's a multiverse picture for you. So if there are an infinite number, surely there should be at least capacity for life to survive on one of those universes. So why not ours? But that's starting to sound a little bit like a faith to me. So atheism says it's all by chance and gradual evolution. There's no intent. You're the process of millions of incidents. Only materialism exists. There's no God and there's no spiritual. So what you see is what you get. Christianity says this was all meant to be. Everything was created. You weren't a mistake. That's the meaning. That's where we came from, origin. Secondly, I wonder where you find your sense of meaning. This might seem like a personal question, but think about this for a moment. Atheism or materialism, if followed through, would have to conclude at its root that there is no meaning. Atheism has a bleak outlook, that we're simply brief sparks in the infinite blackness. One day the universe will burn out and humanity will cease to exist. If we're merely the result of gradual evolution, then any meaning we have would be a creation of what we want it to be. So Josh here, he thinks that the purpose of life is to move as high up the career ladder as possible, to earn as much money as he can. But his wife, Maria, thinks that the purpose of life is to raise a happy family. A family that gets to spend lots of quality time with their parents. Now, who is right? Can they both be right? Their purposes are not always going to sit comfortably together. And they may even change. But at the end of the day, following the atheist view, it doesn't really matter what they think, because both meanings are as valid and ultimately redundant as each other. It takes a really brave atheist to truly admit that there's no meaning and then consistently live that lifestyle out. Christianity, on the other hand, says that you've got a value and a purpose beyond your own choosing. Christianity says human beings are created in the image of God, which sets us apart from the rest of creation. Your meaning is found in relationship with this creator God. Now, I don't know if you were drawn to this picture or not, but there's something in us that seems to find beauty instinctively incredible. We're drawn to truth and to love. We value and we desire it. None of us want to think that our life was meaningless and served no purpose. And we certainly don't live like that's true. But if this world is all there is, and we're simply products of molecular evolution, then what would our meaning be? And what purpose does beauty, truth, or even love serve? Are they even real? Then thirdly, how would you explain morality? It seems to me that we all have an inbuilt morality. But where did it come from? Did we just inherit it? Now, there may be some consensus over things that are right and things that are wrong. Very few people would, for example, dispute that caring for a sick neighbour is good, but events like the Holocaust are bad. They're evil. But how do we know that? And what is it that makes humans more capable of both good and evil than anything else in the animal kingdom? Why have we developed a conscience or human rights? If we really did believe in survival of the fittest or the fastest, why are those things even important to us? Atheism, at its core, cannot say that anything is absolutely right or wrong. If all we are is atoms and particles which make up our brain, they can't impose an ought on us. They can't tell us what we ought to do. If there's no spirit, if there's no soul, then guilt isn't even really a thing. So whilst something might feel wrong, a pure understanding of atheism doesn't really allow you to say this either way. Because in a world that's purely made up of material matter, there are no morals. There are just ways to live that people have agreed on. Murder, for example, is neither good nor bad in and of itself. Therefore, we can just make up our own morality, and it can be as changeable as we like. Christianity says, however, that because there's a moral law, which we all seem to instinctively feel, then it follows that there is a moral lawgiver, and we take our morality from him, the ultimate source of good and justice. We live in a way that reflects his character, and that's our morality. And finally, we come to destiny. Now, this is the question that most people don't really want to talk or think about. We sometimes act like it doesn't really matter, and we'll just work it out when we get there. But surely that's not logically consistent. Our worldview needs to address what happens when we die. What comes next? Well, atheism says death and then nothing. There's no judgment to worry about, so enjoy your life while you can. But at the same time, there's also no hope of a future or some sort of recovery of anything that's been lost in this life. No wrongs will be righted, and there's definitely not anybody looking down on you anywhere, if the material is all there is. As Richard Dawkins famously wrote, in a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither cares nor knows. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. On the other hand, Christianity speaks of an eternal future, that all souls live on after death, that there's a day of judgment where God judges people according to their responses to his Son. The Bible talks of the whole of reality being transformed, about having our relationship with the Creator God reconciled, experiencing a bodily resurrection to go on living forever. I mean, it is literally unbelievable, unless you can believe in a God who created the whole universe in the first place. So that's just the briefest of outlines of these worldviews, and only covers a small amount of what they believe. But it poses the question, does Christianity meet the three tests of a good worldview? First, is it consistent within itself? Or is it full of contradictions, where one thing Christians claim undermines something else? Second, does it correspond to reality? Does it make sense of the things around us, what we see and experience, and how we understand ourselves and our world? And third, is it livable? Is it possible to consistently put this worldview into practice and live by it? Because if it meets these three tests, it must surely be worth at least your consideration. But perhaps The most significant feature of the Christian worldview is that, unlike most worldviews, it is based entirely on a person. One man entered history claiming to be the Son of God, claiming to reveal this unknowable God and what he's really like. Granted, Jesus isn't the only person who made this claim, but I wonder if you could name even one other person who did. If Jesus was right, and it's a big if, then he was worth listening to. He is worth listening to. If not, then Christianity immediately falls apart as a worldview and has no more basis for which you should consider it or waste any more time on it. But it has been said about Jesus of Nazareth, we have no record of his date of birth, and yet the world's chronology is linked to it. He never wrote a book, and yet more books have been written about him than anyone else in history, and the output is still accelerating. The nearest thing to his biography, the Gospels, have been translated into 2,000 languages. He never painted a picture or composed a piece of music, yet nobody's life has inspired a greater output of songs, plays, poetries, film, videos, and other art forms. One such video has been produced in over 100 languages and seen by more people than any other film in history. He never raised an army, yet millions of people have laid down their lives in his cause. Every year, thousands more do so. Except for one brief period in his childhood, his travels were limited to an area about the size of Wales, but his influence is worldwide. His followers constitute the largest religious grouping that the world has ever known. He had no formal education, but thousands of universities, seminaries, colleges, and schools have been founded in his name. His public teaching lasted just 3 years and was restricted to one small country. And now, purpose-built satellites, some of the world's largest radio and television networks, beam his message across the globe. He was virtually unknown outside of his native country, yet in the last issue of the Encyclopedia Britannica, the entry under his name runs to 30,000 words. He is by far the most controversial person in history. Nobody has attracted such adoration or opposition, devotion or criticism. And nobody's teaching has been so fervently received or fiercely rejected. For centuries, every recorded word he ever spoke has been relentlessly analysed by philosophers, theologians, historians, archaeologists, and others. And right now, as you're listening to this, millions of others are studying what he said and did, and are trying to apply the significance of his words and actions to their own lives. And that's why next week in our next But What If series, Bitesize, we're going to be looking at the topic of Jesus and the resurrection. Did he really come back from the dead? Because the entire Christian faith hinges on whether or not this event happened. And so in the run-up to Easter, there really is no more important question you can be asking yourself. So, is Christianity worth your time looking into? I'd say yes, absolutely.